Great. Well, I'm so excited to welcome Nikhil Behl from FICO to CMO Pulse. Nikhil, welcome to the show. I can't wait to learn more about what's been going on. And before I finish my greeting, tell us, you're reporting live from FICO offices for the first time in
2 years.
Oh my goodness, that's exciting.
Yes, it is exciting. This is absolutely fantastic. It's nice to be back in familiar surroundings. I realize I have artwork here from my kids from 2 years ago, which needs an update. It needs an update. They have progressed from this. And it's nice to see all the photos and the pictures and be in familiar surroundings.
Terrific. Well, welcome to the show. It's terrific to have you.
Thank you so much, Tania. Really, thank you for having me. Really impressed with what you've built here with the CMO Pulse. I've had the pleasure of following it and following you for a bit, and it's just been absolutely fantastic to see. So, congratulations.
Thank you so much. Well, we figured if we couldn't be together for a little while longer, we may as well facilitate more of these conversations.
That's right.
I want to start with something that we were chatting about a little earlier. I think so much of what we've talked about on the show, and probably what we talk about as an industry, is about what's changed and how we're adapting to change and all of this sort of stuff. But I want to start with something a little different today, which is, can you tell me a little about your foundational principles and which of these have actually set you up well during the pandemic? And which of these do you think are universal and persistent?
That's a fantastic question, Tania. It's a great way to actually kick this session off and this discussion off. I was really fortunate. My career started at Hewlett Packard Company. And I was incredibly fortunate to know, or to get to know rather, Bill Hewlett, who was one of the founders or co-founders of Hewlett Packard. And in those early days, I had an opportunity to spend time with him, really drilling into and trying to understand the genesis for the HP way, and trying to understand the core tenets and the components of the HP way. Simple things like management by walking around, the open door policy, the ability to actually empower people but hold them accountable as well. The balance that exists over there. And they were just wonderful conversations and discussions. And I learned so much in those early days about, what does it mean to be a phenomenal leader? What does it mean to be a great manager? What does it mean to, be able to run an organization and scale an organization with some core tenets and principles? How do you build culture, and how is culture built on a foundation of values, and how do you determine what those values are that then drives that culture, motivates a team to come together and to function at a high level? And I picked up a lot of wonderful practices and core tenets that I practice to this day and embody how I function myself and how I like my teams to function and the organization to function. And at the root of that, right, at the heart of that is really people. Companies are made up of people. Customers are made up of people. And people are human beings. And that human element is core and foundational to just about everything we do. If you want somebody to engage with you, you have to treat them with an element of respect. You have to treat them with an element of an equal. You have to treat them with as a human being that you value, that you respect, that you trust, that that you're bringing in to yourself, and engage with them in that way. And when you do that effectively, magic happens. And that has been even more true over the course of the last 18 months or 24 months with the pandemic. That has not changed. That core foundation, that basic element of the human being first, the person being first, is incredibly true, and something that we've become much more cognizant of, we've become much more aware of, and frankly have gone back to that core principle, those first principles, whether it was for ourselves and our families, and how we interacted when we're all in the one space, pretty much 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, or our own teammates that we engage with via Zoom or on the phone or in whatever virtual setting that we're in. and our customers and prospects. That core tenet has not changed. In fact, it's been magnified, it's been amplified, and I feel like as a company and as individuals, we've done a phenomenal job of going back to those first principles, putting that in the forefront, and have come out of it much stronger.
Yeah, I really love that you've pointed that out. It actually reminds me of something that shouldn't have been shocking to me, but probably was when I was looking at our own data around, like, what are all these new consumer trends and how's everything different? You're like, oh, so we care about family. Yes. Where, the consumer is focusing back on what matters, like purpose is suddenly so important. And it seems like when you take a moment to take a breath, you sort of recenter. And of course, the question will be, how much of this persists as we start to kind of get back to normal and get back to the rush of it. Along those lines, what do you see as a management principle or perhaps a leadership skill that you've had to develop a little more, in the last 18 months because of how people were situated a little differently or the world was functioning a little differently?
Tania, phenomenal question. I'm already loving this discussion. Empathy is the word that I would go back to. We are all busy. We're all running around. I always have a list longer of things I need to get done than I have time in the day to do. And you tend to sometimes dive straight into it. And you don't take that moment to really step back for a minute and be empathetic. And for me, that was really a skill I had to go back to. I had to re-engage with. I had to redevelop for myself, and that was empathy with my core, my immediate family. My wife and my 2 kids, my extended family, with our friends, with my teammates, with my colleagues, and even with my customers. Simple things like, overnight, we were working from home. The world had changed around us. And, my teammates had their families at home with them. They had to figure out, how to put lunch on the table, how to, make sure that their young kids were doing okay on Zoom classes, have boundaries around dinner time or taking kids out for a walk or taking their dog out, into the backyard or for a walk. And back-to-back meetings that were 60 minutes long or 30 minutes long or whatever time interval they are, without an opportunity to have a break in the middle, is untenable in a situation like that. And so I cannot tell you how many sessions I had up front with my broader team saying simple things like, hey, if you can't come to a meeting, that's totally fine. Just let folks know. Let's take meetings down to 50 minutes so we can give folks 10 minutes to go check on your kids, get some food on the table, or whatever it might be. Center yourself, step outside for 2 minutes, whatever it might be. But that's an example of something that, was brought to my attention early. And really reminded me that we are in a different construct. We're in a different environment. And we have to operate with a sense of empathy as we move forward. And that, by the way, is true for everybody, including ourselves. I had to be empathetic with myself as well. I was not going to be perfect coming, through this process. And we were going to make mistakes. I was going to make mistakes. And I had to be kind to myself and gentle to myself as well and allow myself to do that.
Well, and that makes me think of something that I've spent a lot of time on around just this concept of like managing your state, right? Because you sort of go, there are certain days where if you haven't managed your state, if you haven't done the things that you need to do in order to be high functioning, things will get to you more, you'll react in a certain way. And it's on all of us to manage our own states, of course.
Yes.
But particularly as leaders, and particularly in the last year to call it 18 months, I feel like more of that onus has shifted to leaders to make sure that their teams are also managing their own states. Because you used to have an inbuilt, like you had a commute where you could take a step back or you had some separation, and now it's all so commingled. I think what you're talking about as empathy touches on that. But any tips or any things that have helped you or that have helped your team stay centered in particular that you think might be of use to our listeners?
We had lots of little things that we put in place. We're spread all over the world. I have teams all over the place, and I don't believe in being an absentee leader. I like to be, visiting our teams, visiting our customers, visiting our partners, spending time with folks, face to face, breaking bread with people. The conversations that happen when you go to get a cup of coffee. There's magic in those conversations. There's tremendous value in those conversations, and so we had to find ways to actually recreate some of that. And one example of something that we did was, everybody did stuff like this, right? You went to virtual cocktails, and you went to virtual coffee hours, and you went to whatever it might be. But what worked really well for us was just to set up small sessions with no agenda. We're going to come together. We're going to have a 45-minute conversation, and we're not going to come to it with a predetermined agenda of what we're going to have a conversation around. We're going to treat this as though we were really at the coffee bar, and we're going to have an informal discussion and dialogue with each other, and check it. How you doing? How are your families? How are your kids? How are your parents? How are your friends? What's challenging for you right now? What books are you reading? What Netflix shows are you binging on? Have you picked up a new recipe that was interesting for you? So that was one that we did. The other thing was we through our own internal social networks, we set up a number of sharing activities with fun little contests built into it. Fun shows that you might have watched that you want to share with other people, a new recipe that you might have tried that you want to take pictures of and share with folks and put the recipe out, which, by the way, we actually just sent to every FICO employee a FICO cookbook that came out of one of those where, people from all over the world submitted something new that they had discovered, a new recipe that they had tried, not an old favorite, and came out well. And we actually have packaged that up with those photographs, and we just sent one to every FICO employee. Just fun stuff like that. Yeah.
It's the culmination of all of the COVID trends, right? Like this bread loaf or these muffins.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes, and you can see that on while we are on video here that the the COVID-15 is certainly doing on me well.
Listen, it all sort of stops here. So I think that's in everyone's favor these days. So I looked at your background, and I don't know that I know what a traditional CMO's background is, but usually I don't see tech company CEO or a lot of entrepreneurship and other sorts of stuff. Can you talk a little bit about what led you to your current role at FICO, and what sort of, I guess, drew you to the brand, to the company, and what that whole experience was for you?
Absolutely. I've been incredibly fortunate in my career to have been able to do many different things. I started actually at Hewlett-Packard as an intern in finance, which was phenomenal.
Wow.
I had a great teacher there, a guy called Glenn Pearson that I worked for. He was CFO for the North America business. And he taught me a tremendous amount in terms of, how businesses function, how businesses run, how to read a P&L, how to read a balance sheet, how, asset allocation, capital allocation, P&L management. It was fantastic. It was just a great experience. My first formal full-time job at HP was in marketing. And it was a phenomenal foundation to really learn the core tenets of how to be a great marketeer. And then I was lucky enough to start with a number of other folks to be at the ground level of starting HP's direct business and e-commerce business and grow that to a very successful business over a multi-year period. And then I left HP and I went to startups, and I did a number of startups that I was actively involved in, and some we had successful outcomes, and others we didn't. But they were all wonderful learning opportunities, and through that exercise, I got to know the CEO of FICO, Will Lansing. I actually sold him a company of ours in 2010, a startup that we had in 2010 when he was CEO of Blucora. And he's just a wonderful person. He's an incredible leader. He's very visionary. He came to FICO and became CEO here when FICO was troubled, frankly, in the early 2010s, and has really led a remarkable story where over the course of the last decade, FICO has been one of the best performing stocks on the New York Stock Exchange and certainly in Silicon Valley. It's a wonderful success story. And when I discovered FICO through him, I came to realize that FICO is such an incredible business and company, and has such a phenomenal value proposition for the marketplace. If you look at the FICO, and FICO is really made up of two businesses, the FICO Score and FICO Software, which is really analytic software. If you look at the FICO Score, which is what most people know us for, especially in the Americas, and you look at simple things like, what access to credit look like for minorities, pre-FICO score, post-FICO score, it's completely different. If you look at home ownership for women, pre-FICO, post-FICO score, it's completely different. If you look at car ownership for African Americans, pre-FICO score, post-FICO score, it's very different, right? And I'm not saying that's the only driver here, but the FICO score really took bias out of the equation. It took away somebody walking into a branch or walking into a financial institution and being judged by their diversity, their ethnicity, their gender, and it really made it based off of math, based off of science, based off of truths, and took out that bias out of the equation. And that's just what an incredible platform, to be able to market off of. What an incredible value proposition to be able to amplify and magnify, in the marketplace. And it's really been my privilege to be able to do that and to, take that value proposition that FICO has at its core as its core tenant, and really help that propagate itself, both from in the core U.S. market, which is the roots of FICO, but in 85 countries that we do business in today between our scores and our software business. And our software business is really around infusing intelligence into enterprises, and helping enterprises becoming intelligent enterprises. And that fits perfectly in this sort of digital revolution that we're living in today. The digital transformation that almost every entity almost overnight had to go through 18 months ago or 24 months ago when the pandemic started. We just are perfectly placed and positioned to be able to allow enterprises to successfully transform themselves using digital technologies, using the data that they have, applying analytics to that data, gaining insights off of that, converting those insights into decisions, and then putting those decisions into action to drive meaningful and consequential outcomes at scale. We are better than anybody else in the world to do that. And the world today needs it more so than it's ever needed it. And it's really my privilege to be able to be here to help drive that forward, and to help all the companies and partners that we work with to transform themselves so that they can thrive in this new normal.
As you think about telling that story, and it's an incredible story, and one that perhaps isn't obvious to everyone on the surface, can you talk a little bit about the role of digital? You're referencing digital transformation, and in particular, social media channels when it comes to conveying that purpose for your customers, but also for your team and for people who, are using digital channels as a way to get to know the companies that they, perhaps hope to work for or otherwise hope to engage with.
Marketing is about storytelling. And digital channels, especially social channels, as you mentioned, and we talked about this earlier as well, right, is just a wonderful way to do human-based storytelling. At the end of the day, if you look at digital transformation, there's many reasons why digital transformation is not successful. But there are some core tenets as to why digital transformation is successful. And that happens when you're able to infuse domain expertise with the right technology that you're putting in place. And then executing on that in manageable chunks. right? But being able to infuse those things and bring those things together. And this has been even more so true over the course of the last 18 or 24 months, because we've been in this virtual environment and this has happened to us overnight. That best practice sharing, that domain expertise sharing has been even more important. And actually, we've done a lot of that over the course of the last 18 to 24 months, where we brought smaller groups together, speaking to many more audience types and personas than we've ever done in the past. We used to, for example, sell into, the technology side of the house or into the chief risk officer side of the house, but we didn't necessarily speak to digital transformation officers or to, the finance community or to the marketing community. But we really focused on that over the course of the last 18 months, bringing these persona groups together from across the globe in many ways, but in small, manageable ways in which they could really do ideation together. They could do best practice sharing together. They could really, help each other with what are they seeing that's working, that's not working. And digital, social gives us the opportunity to take those kind of stories, that human element of it, and to propagate that and to amplify that, unlike almost any other medium. And so we've been relying on it and using it actively in that storytelling process and in that propagation of message process, and has worked really well for us.
And how do you keep tabs on what's working and what's not, right? Because you don't want to over measure, you don't want to sort of get too crazy, particularly when things are more experimental, but how do you sort of keep that loop of empowerment, but also accountability that I guess you spoke about a little earlier?
Yeah. I love what you just said. You used the word experiment, right? And experimenting is so important. Just earlier this week, I was having a conversation with my team really about, pushing ourselves to be uncomfortable and pushing ourselves to try new and different things and not being afraid to fail. But then I added to it that we need to be thinking about controlled failure, right? And not letting chain reactions occur. So when we're putting an experiment in place, which we should, and we must, and we need to do more of it, not less of it, let's really think about, how would we control if it doesn't work out? If there is an unintended consequence from that, what is that going to look like? Let's go into it with a little bit of thought around it. And let's make sure that we've got some, breakers in place that allow us to hit the eject button quickly if we need to. But also, to learn from it, right? Fail fast. That's one of the things that when I was an entrepreneur and all those startups that I did, one of the things that we firmly believed in was fail fast, learn from it, move to the next one, try it again, right? Or try the next thing, but based on the learnings that you've gotten from failure. And so I love that tenet, right? I think it's incredibly important. It's underutilized. It's something that we really have to consciously force ourselves to do more of, and everybody can do more of it.
I love that. I love the idea of controlled failure. It's like knowing exactly where you will amputate if it looks like
yes. Yes. Circuit breakers are not a bad thing.
No, it always, I think there's always that very romantic idea, just to reflect on entrepreneurship, where it's like, bet the farm, put everything on a credit card. And you're like, no, I think it's okay to mitigate your risk and to not have it so that you're homeless if certain things go a certain way.
That's so right.
As you look ahead to 2022 and beyond, and let's call it the next couple of years, what are you most excited about as a marketer and as a leader?
Yeah, I'm most excited about actually getting back out and meeting people face to face. We reopened our office in Brazil last week in Sao Paulo, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go down and to spend time with the team. And it is so energizing. It is just absolutely fantastic to be back out with people face to face, celebrating being back together again, ideating brainstorming in person, really planning and strategizing in person. So I'm really looking forward to that. I've got a few more trips planned out over the course of the next quarter or so. We've also started to think about bringing in-person customer events back. And what that's going to look like, early part of next year, with the knowledge and knowing that, we have to be flexible because we really don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. When this thing started, we were like, well, in 6 months, we'll be back to doing events. And, here we are 18 months later or 20 months later, and we haven't really done any, in person per se. And so I am looking forward to, getting that back in place. At the same time, we learned a lot over the course of the last 18 or 24 months, and we don't want to lose that. How do we help balance with virtual and the face-to-face? How do we bring these two things together and not lose the best of both? How do we give people the flexibility to participate in the way that makes best sense for them? How do we not force people to all be in the office, for example, all the time? Let's give people the opportunity of the flexibility to decide what works best for them, based on the individual, based on the role, based on, the team. Let them really have the ability to decide what works best for them. Let's not force a one size fits all, on folks. And from a marketing perspective, we've learned a lot about how to use digital channels and use them really effectively, both for, a wide distribution, as well as for key engagement that is meaningful and authentic in smaller sessions. So let's not lose that. Let's try to find a way to use that at the right place, in the right way, at the right time, in the right forum or mechanism to be able to get the best out of both. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be super exciting.
I love that. Last one for you. If you could go back to the start of your career and offer yourself one piece of advice, what would that advice be?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's so much, frankly, that I would tell myself in those early days.
I'd block off a week and I'd turn my phone off.
Yeah, I think I would tell myself, take more risks. Don't be afraid. Don't be shy. Have the confidence. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. It's okay. Something else will come along. And when I look back at my career, every time I took a risk, I had a blast. I learned a lot. And I'm grateful for the outcome, no matter what that outcome was. I met wonderful people. I built a great set of friendships and network out of it. And I'd say do more.
I love that. Well, we're going to hold there. Thank you so much. It was so great to have this conversation, Nikhil.
Same here. Thank you for the opportunity. It was so nice to talk to you, Tania. Really, really appreciate it. And good luck with many more of these. They're fantastic. Keep them coming.
Thank you so much.